Tales of dreams and imagination. There are two spirits watching over the world. One, the spirit of the skies, gives light and power to all beings. The other is the spirits of the earth, who gives courage and hope. The two spirits each sent a messenger in order to bring peace to the world. And the beautiful messengers were given special power to protect the people's future. That special power was magic. The people were living peacefully, protected by a great magic. Bavmorda, the messenger of the skies, became greedy for power. In arrogance, she decided to conquer the world with her magic. Fin Razel, the messenger of the earth, realized her plot and tried to persuade Bavmorda to return to the skies. But her magic was sealed, and she was turned into an opossum by Bavmorda's wicked magic. Bavmorda declared herself Queen of the World. And started to build up her strength to rule the world. Well, that's a downer plot summary. Hello everyone, and welcome to Let's Play Willow, a game based off a movie that I've only ever seen a couple times over my lifetime, but is a really charming fantasy film by LucasArts, released in '87, I believe? We're just gonna start right on, and they just really plop you on in. First objective, head into your house. Oh, my dear Willow. If you get tired during your trip, come back here. You'll be able to regain your strength. Before you begin your trip, you should talk to your neighbor, the High Aldwin. Be careful. If you revisit your house at any point in time, you can just recover your HP to max. Similarly, you can restore your MP if you have any by coming into this house.
Ah, Willow, Nelwyn's man of prophecy. Take these magic acorns with you. They can turn anything to stone, so it can't move.
You have the magic acorns. It's our first spell. I'll talk more about those in a few moments.
If you come back here during your trip, I'll recharge your magical powers.
Alright, the magical acorn is our first spell. To equip a spell, you pause the game, head to the magic menu, and equip it. Notable, I believe if you enter that menu and exit out of it without selecting one, you technically don't have any magics equipped. The magical acorn, you throw it forward, and if it hits an enemy, if it's vulnerable to it, which I don't believe every enemy in the game is, they'll be frozen in place, allowing them to be easy pickings for you to destroy. And Nelwyn itself is sort of a tutorial town. There's houses all over the place with NPCs you can talk to that give hints towards what to do next, or what's going on in the world, like this guy's hearing about a demon in the village of Dew to the north of us. For the most part, I'm not talking to every NPC in the game, as later on in the game there's going to be fewer and fewer as we go on. Did you meet Vonkar, the best swordsman in the village? He should be preparing the finest weapons for you. Now you see, that's just a straight up lie, because if it were the finest weapons, I could use them through to endgame. You should not use the first sword in this game to endgame. As we proceed through the LP, I'm going to be doing less and less wandering is the best way to put it, I suppose. To get to the village of Dew, you must go through the rugged forest just north of Nelwyn. The text scrolling speed in this game is a little bit slow. I've definitely played slower text speeds, especially if you set a game to its lowest text scroll setting, but this is still relatively slow. In fact, one could probably argue that the game is maybe an eighth just dialogue. It might be a bit generous. Welcome, Willow. My name is Vonkar. Please take this long sword. And we got the long sword, our first sword in the game. To equip swords, you do the exact same thing you do to equip magic. It may be heavy and hard to use at first, but you should get used to it after a few fights. And that is an actual gameplay element. If we check the pause screen, you might notice over there to the left there are the stats. EXP, HP, MP, but then there's strength, defense, and agility. Strength is entirely determined by your sword. It does get higher the more you level up, technically, but overall, swords are what are going to be contributing to it the most. Defense is increased by another equipment piece, shields, that we'll start getting later on. Agility is the only thing that outright raises completely with your level. You see, if you swing the longsword at first, it's going to be a very slow slash. However, the higher level you get, your agility grows, and therefore your agility with specific weapons will grow. By level 3, you're swinging this thing really fast. The other stats are relatively self-explanatory. There's experience points, which enemies each give a certain amount, and the amount of experience points to reach the next level increases as you go through the game. It doubles basically every time. HP and MP, also relatively self-explanatory. They each raise a certain amount per level. HP is how much health you have. If that reaches 0, you get a game over, and I'll talk about what those do in a little bit. And if your MP reaches 0, you can't use any more spells. Each spell has a different amount of magic points it needs. Again, if you're used to playing RPGs of any variety, that's pretty self-explanatory stuff. Although Willow is not a true RPG in the classical sense, it's more so Capcom's idea of mixing an RPG with Zelda elements. As in Control, Willow plays a lot like Zelda-1, just with better controls, to the point where there's even 2 different attacks you can do with your basic sword. You can either do a Link to the Past styled horizontal swipe by just pressing the B button, or if you hold the direction of the B button, you do a stab like Link in Zelda 1 and 2. First enemy are slimes. They move. That's all they do. Enemy varieties of them we'll see later on in this very forest, though, can split off into 4 baby slimes, but the baby slimes don't give any experience. They're just to be pains in the ass. The main slimes are what give us experience points. And north on our way to do, we also encounter our next enemy type, skulls. They will move towards you as their attack, and that is about it. They speed up as they move, so they have some amount of inertia, but otherwise relatively simple. Notable, these are technically random encounters. While yes, every screen generally has a type of enemy associated with it, you're not guaranteed to run into every enemy every time, although I think it might have to do with walking over certain triggers. A general rule of thumb for the game is that you can avoid encounters in certain rooms just by hugging like the northern or the southern wall, wherever it may be. But as you can see, especially with the horizontal swipe, Willow's sword swing is really, really slow. So one thing I recommend doing if you're new to the game, or just in general really, is doing some level grinding very early on off this screen of slimes. I'd say you're going to want to get to at least level 3, which takes 300 experience points. The big thing is, don't die while doing so. You see, Willow works on a password system. When you die, you're given the password, and I believe it's automatically entered on the password screen, so you can just continue from there. But when you die, you are sent back to a checkpoint of sorts. You're sent back to the most recent town with the most recent item you've gotten. But your experience points are in a vein similar to Zelda 2, set down to the most recent level. So if you had like 500 experience points and you died, you'd be set down to 300 again. So that means you're probably going to need to do some more grinding at that point. But at least it's not the cruelest checkpointing system I've ever seen. And welcome to Dew. This town is really big. In fact, Willow's towns are generally bigger than they probably should be. Our first objective is to reach this guy's house over here.
So, you have come from Nelwyn. Please, rest as long as you need to.
This guy is the standard inn we're going to be seeing moving forward. He restores your HP and MP to max. Now, our objective in Dew, there's a couple things you can do, pun unintentional, right off the bat. As you can head to what is arguably like the 3rd best grinding spot in the game from here to potentially gain some levels from enemies that I want to say give like 20 experience per. But I am trying to intersperse my grinding throughout this LP just so it doesn't take forever. But you are going to need to do some grinding throughout this game no matter what for MP reasons. I've heard that Bogarda is the father of the chief of this village, and he was changed into a demon by the wicked magic of Bavmorda. Hey, it looks like you could use this shield. And we now have the wooden shield. Shields are the equipment pieces that increase your defense, purely. You should hear the story from the village chief. Now, I forget if the wooden shield can do this just because it's made of wood. But shields can also block certain attacks, namely certain stab attacks from enemies or projectiles. I think it's only the 2nd shield and beyond that does that, though. At least, from memory. If you go west from here, you'll see a road that goes through the Rock Mountain. As you go further, you'll find the entrance to the cave. Sometimes you can hear a weird voice from inside. You know, I criticize the dialogue scroll speed, and it is pretty noticeably slow in this game, but I will give the game this. The NPCs in this game are worth talking to, as not only do you learn things about the world around you, but they actually give you legitimate hints on where to go next, or at least what your next objective might be. I think that Bogarda lives in the forest north of this village. So, for instance, our next objective is probably that Bogarda guy, so we're probably going to be heading there within the next 3 minutes. But our big objective right now is to talk to the village chief of Dew, who is in this house right over here.
The story of Bogarda is true. My father was a courageous and just person before being put under such wicked magic. The villagers have been put through such misery. I will give you this magic heel mace. This is a valued treasure of this village, and is a symbol of a spirit protecting us. When you are tired from fighting, just clutch the heel mace tightly, and say the magic word and you will regain your strength. And now we have the heel mace. This is the most important spell in the game for the long run of it, as it's your healing spell. It costs, I think, 20 MP, but it heals around 70 HP. It's incredibly good. You're going to be using this until maybe about the second to last part of this LP, maybe third to last, because it plays in for that long in this game. Not that this is a very long game. I'd say even the first Final Fantasy or Zelda-1 are arguably longer RPGs, quote-unquote, on the system. But now I'm going to go a bit out of my way. You see, we want to head north to find Bogarda as our next objective, but I'm heading here towards the Death Forest, which is an area we'll be visiting probably a part or two from now, and going through this chain of areas in order to get another shield. You gotta want to be careful when you do this, though, as not only can the falling rocks hurt a lot, but on these next two screens in particular, you can encounter troll enemies who kind of look like weird bear things. And if you're not level 3 or above, your sword swipe is not going to be fast enough to deal with them more often than not, as they'll try to jump into you really quickly. Also, get used to hearing this song. I'm just going to tell you that right now. You hear this song for most of the game, arguably. This game's soundtrack is pretty good in general, but it's relatively small is the thing. And here we have the small shield. It's not actually smaller. It has a strong shield made of metal. Now, I mentioned earlier, I'm not sure if the wooden shield can, but this shield and beyond can most certainly block certain attacks and projectiles. The annoying thing about it, though, is similarly to certain Zelda games, it'll only count as a defensive hitbox if you're not attacking, so you need to be patient about your sword strikes sometimes in order to get past certain enemies. And now we have a new enemy type, bats. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't break out into 4 bats and then become a king bat that has way more HP but gives way more experience points. If you're level 3, you shouldn't have any problem dealing with these things. It's just a matter of wasting down their HP at that point. But the bats in general are really good for grinding early on just because they usually spawn in groups of 4 to 5. And that's the healing spell. It's pretty self-explanatory. At this point, though, I'm heading back to the healing house back in Dew, as I want to make sure I have a good checkpoint at this point. Also, that was the death dog enemy. They'll charge at you. That's it. Kind of a terrifying effect in the movie, though, despite when you realize that they're just dogs with costumes on. In general, Willow's effects as a movie have aged really well. It's that, like, peak late 80s, early 90s industrial light magic LucasArts effects. It looks great. Honestly, in terms of a fantasy movie, it probably looks better than most fantasy movies that aren't Lord of the Rings from the 90s into the early 2000s. It's in general a really charming movie. If you have Disney Plus, I recommend checking it out, though I would recommend finding a DVD instead because Disney is a corrupt piece of shit. It's a fun fantasy adventure movie. Warwick Davis is great in it. So is Val Kilmer. Oh, hello, skeleton. You want to see Bogarda? If that's the case, find and bring back the gold statue that the villagers hid in this forest.
Okay. So before we get into our next objective, we have to go out of our way to find this golden statue. And there's a couple ways you can go about finding this.
But it's located essentially in the most northwestern screen of this forest, but you can't reach that just by heading north and then west. There's a lot of twists and turns in the areas in this game that you need to take in order to reach your objective. Sometimes it gets kind of annoying, sometimes I understand why. You do find some new enemies along the way, though, like those weird dog fly things. The way they work, they charge forward and they eventually speed up if they're on screen long enough. They will generally turn once per, but that's about all there is to them. Also notable, at this point, I'm going to be doing some more level grinding, this time only to, I think, level 4 or 5, just to make Bogarda's Cave that much more simple. Level 4, okay. I would say there's probably a couple more times I could have done some minor grinding throughout the game just to make things flow a bit better on my end, if you either ignore enemies along the way or don't kill enough just for grinding, it is very easy to not level fast enough in Willow. I think it's potentially very possible to reach the point in the game where you need like near max MP, while probably still being at that point level 8 or 9, while the max level in this game is 16. And because of that, you need to sparse out some grinding every here and there just to make things flow a bit better. Also, we got these weird lizard dragon enemies. They're one of the most annoying in the game. Whenever you actively attack them, I believe, they shoot 1 to 2 volleys of a spread shot of fire that the small shield can block. But I just prefer to try and spam fire the enemy to death, as I find that generally works better for me, but sometimes not. But here we find the gold statue that skeleton wanted. However, this is also the first chest that'll have something else for us. It is a golden image of a human face. We also have the Light of Life. I believe these are in set chests. What this does is it restores your HP, I want to say up to max, or at least up to whatever your max is. And that's going to be really helpful in the dungeons later on, as sometimes you can take a lot of damage very quickly in this game. With that, though, we have the golden statue, so now let's head back to that skeleton and enter Bogarda's Cave. Bogarda is in this cave. As soon as you hand over the gold statue, you must return here. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're going to be entering Bogarda's Cave, our first proper dungeon. See you guys then.